Welcome everybody. We're gonna have everybody come on here in a little minute. My name is Stuart Olson. I'm on the marketing team. I'm gonna go off video. I'll be in the back end answering your questions, making sure chat's open. So feel free to jump into the discussion if you have any thoughts or questions. And I'll let Jessica, who's our VP of strategy here, take it away. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Stuart. And thank you so much for everyone for joining us today. We're so excited to have such a wonderful group of folks here to speak to you and have you all join us here. Um, First, I'm going to do some introductions to Equal Opportunity Schools and to the wonderful folks I have on the call to speak to this really important pressing issue that we know all of our schools are dealing with today. But here at Equal Opportunity Schools, we believe that every student should be seen, understood, and have an opportunity to realize their full potential. And so that vision for the future and how students should be experiencing our school environments really is what leads us to this discussion today around the importance of student engagement, belonging, and thus, really addressing the issue of chronic absenteeism. For us as an organization, we also believe that it's essential that we work with others in the field to learn about the research, what you all are doing in terms of what issues are most pressing in our school buildings. And that's why we have the pleasure and joy of bringing this group here today together. I've had the pleasure of getting to work with these fine folks in a myriad of ways. But first we have Vila from Education First joining us. Education First is a national leader in the education strategy, research, and policy space that work directly with schools and districts to ultimately ensure that all students are prepared for success in college and career. We also have Gabby Lopez here from the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, who they partner with educators, researchers, and they build tools and supports to unlock the full potential in all students. So we are so lucky to be partnering with these folks. And then I have Dr. Taylor here, who is actually our superintendent in residence. And we have a program here at Equal Opportunity Schools where we make sure that we have the voice of educators and people who've been in the work on our advisory and helping us with our strategy and the direction of our program and our work. With all of this, we as a collective have also just launched the All-In Attendance Collaborative, which is really aiming to, one, use the research we already have around chronic absenteeism and what leads to that, to really work with a cohort of schools to identify these best practices, try them on, and build data tools to help our school partners really have data that they can go and leverage to go actionize the very things that we're going to be talking about today. With Ed First providing coaching and learnings for this cohort. So really excited to have everyone join us today. I'm going to let Hila kick us off with a little quick introduction.
Hey everyone, thanks for having me on. I'm Hila Deshmukh-Kauri, and as Jessica shared, I'm a partner in Education First Consulting. And my background, so folks kind of know where I'm coming from. I come from a focus on measurement, data, evaluation. That's been my world for a really long time. I've worked for about 10 plus years on assessment issues, in particular trying to expand the ways that we think about measurement and assessment to be inclusive of the voices of students, families, and educators in assessment practice and in thinking about assessment with a human-centered lens. So that's a little bit about me.
Wonderful. Gabby, do you mind going next?
Not at all. Welcome everyone. So Gabby Lopez of the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative. My background is similar to Hila's. I come from a research evaluation background, but primarily using and implementing those tools in community-based and school-based settings. Done a lot of work around understanding student experience, whether it was pre-K, whether it was elementary, middle, or high, and then using that information to create better supports and design better supports for young people within those settings and families, to really support them, to ensure that they are learning and living into their best version of themselves. And I've been doing this for about 30 years, believe it or not. So we've been trying to do a better job about it for a long time in education.
Thank you so much, Gabby. Dr. Taylor, do you mind?
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Ron Taylor. I'm a lifelong educator. Similar to Gabby, this is my 29th year professionally being an educator. For the first 28 of those years, I was a teacher in an elementary setting. I was an assistant principal. I was a principal. I was a regional superintendent and a superintendent of schools for 13 years, all on the East Coast between Washington, D.C. and New Jersey. And I'm just thrilled to work with EOS. I actually work with EOS as a superintendent in partnership. And I can just vouch for the work that we did together. It was the first time, really, in the history of our school district that we saw positive movement in our goal to make sure that all students had access to our most rigorous courses. And I'm happy to be here.
Thank you so much, Dr. Taylor. So to get us the conversation started, we really wanted to ground ourselves in kind of the current state of chronic absenteeism because we know it is such a pressing issue. And so we're going to do a quick poll in just a minute, but the areas that we'll talk about today are really, sorry, Stuart, the state of chronic absenteeism today and some of the kind of things that we're seeing that are maybe different than we've seen historically. The root causes of absenteeism and the underlying importance of student belonging and grounding much of our approaches to this. And then we'll talk more concretely about the actual strategies to boost engagement and attendance, underlying all of that, obviously belonging. So, and then we'll have a few minutes at the end for some Q&A. So we'll get started with a quick poll. So we really do want to hear from the audience to understand, in your building, if you are an educator, what percent of your students, student body, are chronically absent? If you are not, in a school building, if you have a child in a building and it's school and what that percent is, you can put that in there. If you have a community school, please, feel free to add that in, and we'll just see where we end up compared to the actual average. Wonderful. We have about
Still coming in. We got about 40% voted. Other folks want to tag in there really quick? Alrighty, I'm gonna go ahead and share the results. All right, Justin, then you can take it away.
So we can see that for our audience here, 29% of folks are reporting between 5 and 10% of their student body is chronically absent, but then a close second at 25% is at the 21 plus. So I'm going to stop sharing those. But when we look at really the kind of national average, Sarah, if you can move to the next slide, currently, here in the United States, what we can see is, post-COVID, we've really, I think there was an expectation that we would see that come down, but for the K through 12 space, 28%, so nearly a third of our schools, our students are reporting that they're chronically absent. And what we mean by chronically absent is missing 10% of school or more. And that we know that this rate is even higher for our students who are from low-income households. And we also know there are serious impacts to missing school. And so I was hoping for my panelists, knowing the years that you've been in education and in just the last few years alone, in terms of the current state, what do we know about, what does the research say about the impacts of chronic absenteeism, and how have you best seen that communicated to communities or to families and students about the importance of really addressing this issue?
Well, I can answer the second part of that question. I know that during my career, the the way that absenteeism was framed, it changed dramatically. Um, During my time as an assistant principal and a principal, we were taught to review our daily attendance numbers. In other words, the percentage of kids who came to school every day, which was always in the low to mid 90s, and so it was never seen as a challenge. During my superintendency, the state began to share with us the chronic absenteeism methodology, and it really opened up the eyes of many of us. And we found that as we shared with families and with educators, um, the definition of the 10% of what that means, and 2 days per month is a trajectory towards being labeled chronically absent. And I think that that was a big surprise for lots of us. And so we took the steps of just trying to really share with our stakeholders the why. Why is being chronically absent so significantly impactful for their children? How even 1 or 2 days when you're not sick, if you're away from school, what the research shows about that. And it really helped us to start to see those numbers decrease.
Thank you so much, Dr. Taylor. And for Ela and Gabby, in terms of the research of the impacts that we know it can have on students, can you speak more to what we know about that?
I'm happy to kick us off. So I think just to pick up on Dr. Taylor's comments, I mean, I think that I just love some of your comments because it definitely is borne out in much of the research too, that when you tell parents the importance of coming to school and also the definitions around chronic absenteeism, when a kid misses more than a couple of days of school, that is actually has potential significant impacts on their feelings of connection, their outcomes in terms of learning, etc. I think it makes a really big difference. The other point I'd hit home on this slide too is while the numbers are an average, I think that you're looking at on this slide, they vary individually by region, by district, and just to put a little bit of, I think in 2023, for example, 50% of California's kindergartners were chronically absent. So while these numbers are an average, it might look different in your particular region, in your district, and paying attention to what's happening in your context is really important. And we also know that chronic absenteeism can significantly impact or affect students' academic, social, emotional learning outcomes, and it disrupts learning. And so those are some messages I think that we've also seen have been helpful in communicating to school communities and to students themselves.
I would add to that the and Ela mentioned it, and the level of connection that we want to engender for all of our students and all of our young people and families um, to flourish. And I think that that model of human flourishing is really important, and
Mhm.
connection is critical to that. And if the types of schools and the type of communities that we want to have across the board require us to have deep levels of connection. And it is impossible to do that if you are not in proximity to those individuals that you want and feel that you want to be connected to.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much for that context. If we can move to the next slide, because I think this is a really lovely segue into some of the framing that Education First has done in this space around the root causes of chronic absenteeism. Ela, maybe if you could just start us off to help us understand what, thematically some of the underlying elements of these areas are. Um, and what we know about the details of the different areas.
Yeah, so I'm happy to, and just I'm happy to share, or I think the EOS team can share a landscape scan that we completed that goes into much more detail. I just want to make sure this slide comes from that, but to credit this, a lot of this research comes from Attendance Works. And you can certainly find a lot more information about all of the root causes on chronic absenteeism. They've done a lot of really great work to try to document the root causes in a lot of their publications. So I just want to make sure I acknowledge that. I think just a few things on this slide to think about. I don't want to necessarily go through everything. I think what you can see on this slide is there's a range of root causes for chronic absenteeism. And the important, I think, thing that we've taken away from the research is how individualized those are. So it can be anything from factors, the barriers that might be like systemic barriers, poor transportation, right? Housing or food insecurity, inequitable access to services or lack of access to technology, for example, could be like barriers that students face. Misconceptions could be, you know, some of what Dr. Taylor talked about earlier, maybe not realizing the importance of coming to school necessarily, or thinking that like attendance only matters when you get older, things like that. A misunderstanding of what counts as an absence or not. So those are some misconceptions. Aversions are just, this is a big category for a lot of different things. So it could be anything from your experience going to school, your perception of your school environment, how welcome you feel. Example, things like bullying that you might be experiencing, anxiety and stress. A lot of this has to do with the way that a student might feel about their school and whether they belong. So this is kind of linking specifically to the student belonging aspect. Do I feel seen? Do I have a trusted adult? If I don't, I might not want to go. And then misconceptions about school. This is around disengagement. So things like, I don't have a meaningful relationship. School is really not useful. It's not going to do anything for me. I have better opportunities outside of school. In high school, you see some of these things a little bit more, in particular, no enrichment opportunities, etc. So those are some misconceptions that I would want to highlight in terms of root causes. And just, I know I want to make sure I give the floor over to Gabby and Dr. Taylor, but I will just say one thing, which is that part of what brings me to this work is that I personally was a chronically absent student for many, many, many years through the end of high school. And the only way really I got through high school successfully was that my teachers, people really recognized that I was chronically absent for a lot of really good reasons that were happening at home. They kind of honed in on what was keeping me from coming to school, and they met me where I was and helped me kind of get through, even though I was missing school. And sometimes that meant finding ways to bring me to school, and other ways, sometimes it meant finding ways to bring school to me.
Thank you so much for sharing that personal anecdote, Ela. I think that's a really generous story in terms of illustrating what we say oftentimes at EOS, where luck shouldn't, you were so lucky that your educators recognized that in you and saw and were accommodating. But we don't want to rely on luck for all of our students, that they're lucky enough that they had some folks around them who saw it and were able to do something. So with that, Dr. Taylor and Gabby, happy to have you go ahead, Dr. Taylor.
First of all, thank you for sharing your story. Super moving, and it kind of reminds me of parts of my career where we talked about and realized that absenteeism, chronic absenteeism, many times is a symptom of other larger challenges that student is experiencing, many times alone or within their family unit. And so for us, we always wanted to make sure that when we saw those chronically absent students start to really rack up those absences, to have a chance to create a triage with the guidance counselor, maybe with the nurse as well as the administrator and the teachers, to really visit with those families and invite them in to talk about what's happening, right? Do they know that their child is missing this amount of school, right? We're also assuming that all of our warning letters and all of our presentations are seen by every parent who's in our school. Many may not, right? They may be in a situation where they're working double jobs, or their address changed, and they don't even know that their kid's missing this much, right? So sometimes those triage really help us to not only identify what the core issue is, but also address it with the family, and not have such a persecution feeling when we have that interaction with them, right? That we're here to support and something is happening and we love your kid and we love you.
It's so important. I think when you, particularly what you both of you are speaking to, is this acknowledgement that we have to have light touch and heavy touch systems in place to understand what's happening. And there's when I was running, I used to run student assistance programs at elementary and middle schools. And we had this motto where we would try to remind ourselves that the student, the family, that adult walks into your classroom, your space, and we have no idea of all of the things that they're bringing in with them, and all of the between 6 in the morning and 8 in the morning when they're trying to get to school, work, all of the things that they're doing. And it's a level of grace that we have to hold with one another, and understanding that most people want their children to do well, be good humans, learn things in school, and they are not, being absent is not something that they want for their child from school. And coming into identifying or trying to figure out what's happening with a student and with a family when you're seeing these indicators, these behaviors of not showing up to school, needs to take a human-centered approach to it, and requires a lot of engagement and a lot of connection and trust building with families.
Thank you so much. And I think what you all have really hit on is, we talk a lot too about the underlying piece of student belonging. And so I think that sometimes, has concrete understanding, but if we could illustrate for folks kind of how all of these things really play into a student's sense of belonging. A lot of the things that we've talked about are things that maybe are outside of educators' control. And so I get asked often of, I have these things going on in my community, or I know these things are happening for my students in terms of their home lives. Like, what can I do as an educator to address issues of belonging and engagement in my four walls?
Well, I can share from my time. Just for Gabby's last comment, I just agree 100%, right? That um, I was a principal in a really tough area of Washington, D.C. And from the time that I was a teacher and assistant principal, I always looked at school as an opportunity to celebrate, right? And so being at the front door of the school, welcoming every kid, shaking their hands, and knowing everyone's name, and creating those chants for us to have our joint chants about our school and what we believe about ourselves, and all those kind of things, and really talking about the way, right? So from my school was named Emory, and so we talked about the Emory way, right? So when the kid is misbehaving, I'm not talking about that student, I'm talking about their behavior, and their behavior not matching our expectations of the Emory way. And the same thing with, I'm looking at the attendance piece, is I'm not angry at you, I'm concerned because I want you here, right? That's also part of the belonging, is the student knowing that we want you here, right? You make our school. You are important to us every day, right? And it's reflected in our practices. So are the teachers taking attendance every day? If kids are tardy, do we have an intervention for that? Are we ensuring that kids eat every day? Are we understanding that for some kids, them coming to school today was a victory, right? That was a success for them. And for me, we always just talked about, as leaders, everyone wants to know what you value. And they don't have to ask you, they can just watch you, right? And so for me, the saying was, what gets monitored gets done. And so understanding the importance of attendance every single day for every single kid, trying to have jovial competitions who had the highest attendance per class, and showing in the hallways and near the front door how our attendance is meeting our goals, and reminding families when we're having our meetings, putting it in your newsletters. If you continue to talk about it, everyone else will, and they will also understand. And when there are opportunities to not be in school, the students can remind the parents of how important it is that they want to be in school. And so that really worked for me with a great team as a leader.
Thank you so much, Dr. Taylor. And I think really want to emphasize the asset-based conversations that you highlighted in terms of, not you're not in trouble, but maybe if and affirming, their presence in school or the hardship it takes to get to actually be there. So Eli, I don't know, and Gabby, if you want to jump in at all there and the beautiful things that Dr. Taylor shared.
So when I hear Dr. Taylor speak about the environment that he's creating, what stands out to me is that we have known, the research has told us for a long time, the environments we create for learning make a huge difference. And they are non-tangible things that are literally coming across as humans. Like I see you, I have a way of connecting to you. There is something unique about you. And it actually made me a little bit emotional because it ultimately what children want, what we all want, is to be seen, known, and loved, right? Like that's it. And if we're able to do that in a school, and young people know that this is the environment that they're going into, that there is an adult that is going to miss me if I am not coming to school, they they will move mountains to be able to get there because it is so deeply ingrained and built into our DNA. And we have a responsibility to build those environments. And we do that through seeing the good in them and through creating environments that are positive. And positive environments are also characterized by having high expectations. And so those things, rigorous coursework, learning, creating meaningful opportunities for engagement, all of that is really, really critical to ensuring that you have spaces that students want to come to and that families feel invited into.
It's hard to follow those comments. And I think both Gabby and Dr. Taylor have covered a lot of what I probably would have said with so much more feeling. I think the one thing I'd maybe add is we've been talking, kind of underlying some of this conversation is the importance of data collection, right? Dr. Taylor talked a little bit about teachers should be collecting attendance data and reporting on that every day, looking at that every day. And I think that is definitely a really important form of information, but I wouldn't underestimate the small d data too that you could be collecting about what's happening with individual students. So we in our work often lead with what we call empathy interviews, and that's really just in a very non-judgmental way listening to people about what is going on in their lives, what are their experiences, understanding how they define their own problems. And I think that's something that we do with students, educators, and for folks in the audience who are listening, I think I would encourage also any chances you have to gather that kind of data about what your kids are feeling in the buildings is always an added benefit and can help you kind of tailor your strategies and responses to individual students as well.
Thank you all so much. That was extremely helpful. And I think just taking that a little bit further is thinking about, those more concrete things that you have observed or done in your school buildings to really ensure you can move the dial on not just absenteeism, but all these things that underpin the issue that we've been discussing today. And I know, Dr. Taylor, one of the things that you shared with us, I think what you said was, if it doesn't get measured, it doesn't get done. And so I don't want to steal that wonderful quote, but if you could talk more a little bit If we could talk about how, what are some assessment and measurement tools that you've seen to be effective for building leaders?
So I would just give kudos to those folks who design our student information systems. They've come so far just during my short stint of my 28, 29 years of my career. They've become so sophisticated, right? And they can be customized. A few examples in many districts, I'll couch that in districts that I've worked with and others that I'm aware of, um, they use their student information system to generate automatic notifications when a student is on a trajectory for chronic absenteeism. And I spoke about that a little bit earlier because not everyone gets their mail, right? In the reality of the world, not everyone is checking their mail, but it's a good start to make sure that we're being thoughtful in informing families that you're not chronically absent yet, but if this pattern continues, it could negatively impact your child. And one of the things that's really important about those letters, though, that I've seen is having a thoughtful leader reviewing what the letter's text says, literally, right? Because I've also received emails from families who've received letters that were not thoughtfully written, right? And so it's so important. The messaging is just so important that you're sending this from a place of concern, right? I'm concerned because we love your kid. We know that they can do fantastic things, but we're concerned about what has happened, and want to just let you know how important coming to school every day is, right? There's a positive spin that you can put on those communications. The second piece obviously is understanding what your policies in your district say, right? Because those overarching policies that are developed by the Board of Education with the superintendent that are really how you should govern the school when it comes to these type of matters is understanding that there's probably specific language about what happens when students hit certain numbers of days of absenteeism, including consecutively, right? Because that can be a big difference. 3 days or 4 days is different when it's consecutive and we haven't heard anything. There's probably in those policies direction to the district on who should be reaching out to those families when they meet certain days or consecutive days, et cetera, beyond just those letters. So all those things are put in place to help us to be mindful and to know how high a priority this should be. I mean, we spoke a little bit in previous calls about some of our learnings, and one of mine that I repeat often. I just wrote a book and I repeated it in there too. Is how important Maslow's hierarchy of needs is. It's one of the first things that we learn as educators, right? That kids can't learn if they don't feel safe. Well, they can't learn if they're not there, right? So if they're not there, they may not be safe. So all those things tie in, and I was speaking about the climate and culture of the buildings when I was a principal, and one of the things that we said every morning as a school, the entire school would have our morning meeting. We would close it out with, my heritage is one of greatness, but I know that I can do more. I must never do less than those that came before, but my mind can conceive and my heart can believe. I can achieve, and the kids would just rock the walls every day with that. So part of some kids leaving or not coming to school or missing a day, they would talk about missing that, right? I didn't get to say my heritage with the school. These are kindergarten kids, right? Who had memorized that, and we wrote on the walls and everything. But just making the school a place where kids want to be. Maybe lesson one on addressing chronic absenteeism.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Dr. Taylor. And I think just shows the power of these little rituals and aspects that you do at school that really students and young people really hold on to and are important to them. Gabby and Ela, just knowing your background in assessment and research, do you have anything you'd like to add on there? We can also pivot to just more talking through the other kind of solutions that we know are going to solve these issues. Go ahead, Gabby.
So I was gonna call Ela into, because yeah, Ela is one of the smartest folks I know. And there is something that she holds really, really in sort of the bridging of what just Dr. Taylor just described. And that's when I hear Dr. Taylor, it requires you to see and know your families and students and community that you're creating this environment for. And so, Ela, I'm going to ask you, like, if we think about data and the type of how we would systemize some of these things, what would you recommend to folks, to leaders?
So I think Gabby's referring, for a number of years, we've been working with a cohort of organizations to start to think about what would it look like to show what's possible around expanding measures of the learning environment. And so that is putting life to some of what Dr. Taylor said through data, right? So the student information systems that you're referring to, I think, are incredible and often kind of reductive too, can be reductive. And so when you don't pair that information with information that is asset-based at the school level, at the building level, about what's happening in the school environment from an asset-based way, I think it takes really a lot of data savvy to make sense of data in an asset-based way without additional support. So we've been working on bringing students, I referred to this at the beginning when I introduced myself, bringing students and educators into the process of defining what they want out of a school environment. So that's one really important thing. And we share some of the information on the website that we've created to contain some of this stuff. But we think of it as community-powered assessment and measurement. What would it look like if you brought students, educators, family members, community members into conversation and dialogue about what we all collectively want out of school? And what does it look like, right? What does that actually look and feel like? How would we measure and know whether we're achieving our collective goals? And so that can be, when we talk about measures, that can be anything from school culture measures to examples of student work. And I think what's important in what we've been driving at has been that everybody has a voice in defining what that means and what it looks like. And I think when you start to bring those voices in, you start to also, it's also a way to rebuild trust in our schools and our communities as we think about what we all collectively want for kids. So I think, Gabby, that is a little bit of what you were referring to. I'm happy to share some of the resources we've created for district teams as well, to support districts on thinking about ways to think about data and measurement as a trust building exercise rather than putting people under a microscope.
Yes.
And I'm going to borrow EOS's mirrors, not microscopes.
Yes. Yes. Thank you. And Jessica, I'm gonna start answering the question that you left us with before Ela and I were playing stare off at each other, like, who's gonna talk? So I think that to add on, like, there's all of these, there are tools out there if you want to move in a direction as a school leader of in an asset-based way of understanding what's happening with families, how to build a collective environment that is good for your school community. Then there are really, and I know this is EOS, but I'm going to shout it out because I think the insight card and the way in which EOS actually helps educators and school leaders see young people through their own lens. Like these are the types of questions that inspire students, that inspire young people to connect, that inspire them and connect them to other adults. Like, what am I interested in? If nobody asks me what I'm interested in, you're just assuming based on whatever understanding you as an adult have of my experience, and then designing from that versus designing from the place of asking, understanding, and doing so with humility. And, you know, everybody here has been in schools, we've all been young people, and we all know, like, we are deeply disconnected from the experience at 50 of being a 14 or 15-year-old. Like, times were different, fashion was different, all the things were different, right? And so they know that, and they see that falsehood, like, right off the bat, And that is not a way to create connection. And so there are, EOS has a great tool. I mean, we at CZI, we are builders, technologists. We developed a tool called Along that is based on developmental science, relationship science, and is designed for schools to use so that educators can connect more authentically with students and get to know them. And that's in service of creating better connections in school and fostering a really positive learning environment. So there are various ways that different schools can do this and different leaders can do it. But at the end of the day, it is truly about being humble and open to getting to know the community and not assuming that you already know the community and you already know those students because you've been in that same building for so long. Every group of students is different. Every group of families is different. And we owe it to them to enter into the space with curiosity and humility.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I know we're getting close to time, but I think one thing, I know educators are so busy and there's so much every day going on. What if you were to suggest, and we want to give at least time for one or two questions. So if you just be quick in this response, but if you were leading a school today and there was one thing that you were going to do or change or make sure you were doing in your building. I know you probably already said it today, but like we said, a lot of times we need to hear it a few times to really hit it home. And I feel that with me and myself and my 4-year-old. So if you could just say the one thing that you think, if you're going to walk away from here today and make sure that a leader was doing in their district or their school, what would that be?
I would say, first of all, it's a great question. If only one thing, get to know your kids, right? Creating the opportunity that allows you to get to know them, whether it be small group discussions, whether it be surveying, whether it be, um, you know, having evenings where student leaders get to tell you what's happening, and depending on, of course, the size of your school. But the more that you know your school, your kids in your school, the more seen they will feel, right? And so that's such an important thing is that, we were all teenagers and we know that being a rebel is kind of part of that adolescent journey. But you want them to know that you see and you hear them and that this entire building and everyone who works here, we're really all here for you. Like if we didn't have you, we wouldn't be here. This brick and mortar is here for you, and they can't hear that enough, right? They may roll their eyes. They may show that you're not cool and that you're too mushy or something like that. But I remember, I'll be really quick. I remember being an assistant superintendent in the district and going into a school, and we were at a big high school, and two kids were roughhousing, and they sprinted right past me and the person I was with, and the principal said, "Hey, if you don't know their name, they're going to have fun somewhere else, right?" It's like knowing kids know when you don't know them. They know that. And there's a message there, you know, with you and the efforts that you put forward to get to know them. And as Gabby said, I love the insight card. It was a game changer when I was a superintendent, where each student had a card that detailed who they are, what their interests were, and most importantly, who their trusted adult was. But what was important is if they didn't have a trusted adult, that was as important for us as leaders. And I'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
I'm happy to follow. I think you covered a lot of what I would have said too, Dr. Taylor, so thanks for that. And just to pick up on maybe one or two additional finer points on some of the points you made, we know that belongingness is the number one factor that impacts chronic absenteeism or predicts chronic absenteeism. So I think the one trusted adult and EOS's insight tool does cover some of that as well, identifying the one trusted adult for every kid. So it can be hard as a school leader, as a principal. You may not know every single student equally as well in your building, but somebody in your building should. And I think that can also be, think of all of the adults in your building as resources for that. Often students will say it's the janitor or this coach, it doesn't always necessarily have to be a teacher, but if that student has one trusted adult, and every person in your adult in your building can be a resource and be considered that one trusted adult, can build that sense of belonging in a building.
The leader sets the tone and expectation for what Dr. Taylor and Ela have mentioned. That would be my, like, walk into it with the expectation that somebody in this school will know every student.
Thank you all so much. This has been extremely fruitful and just so wonderful to hear all of your learnings and sharings. I know we're a little over time, or we're actually a few minutes over time, but it looks like most people are staying. So if you all don't mind, if there's a question or two in the chat, Stuart, we would be happy to take it. Or if anyone has a question.
Oh, one just popped in. Thanks very much. Someone added a question that they're with the technical center. They have 10 schools and 800 students, sizable size. So just looking for any other more specific suggestions around solving absenteeism. I think you hit great notes around the data and the systems to know where the issues are. Spoke to the community aspect too. I think there's some great rhetoric you had, Dr. Terry, also about just what you do now and what you build for in the future. So it's a huge problem. It's insurmountable, but there's little things you can do today, and then there's things you can build for in the future. I saw that in the Ed First report that you had there too. So I don't know if there's something around that with how you approach solving this too that might be, what are like the immediate first tactical things you could do today versus, a lot of this is great programmatic, systematic things that, takes a little time to build too. So I don't know if that helps answer that question.
Yeah, so I would say that, first of all, I wouldn't say it's insurmountable, right? I think that as the leader, your belief, it's contagious, right? If you believe that you can have 100% attendance, understanding for kids who are ill, then it can happen. My first piece of advice for that leader would be to review your data first, right? Part of this, somewhere in your systems, and maybe even on your state reports, there's a number, a percentage of students who are chronically absent. What is that number? Is it accurate, right? Because a big problem sometimes can be that teachers are so busy they don't take attendance as consistently to record the data as accurately. That could be one issue. Does everyone know that this is a concern of yours? Everyone in your stakeholders, the folks who you are responsible to, do they understand it? Do they understand literally the definition of chronically absent, what it can mean, as my colleagues have spoken to on this call? Do you have examples of it, right? Are you watching it? Are you discussing it? Are you announcing it every day? Are you congratulating those classes that are 100% with their attendance? There's just, you have to, my daughter would say I would have to be annoying with it, right? You have to really love it so much and care so much about it. But to me, it starts with the data. It starts with knowing what your information is and making sure that it's accurate, and then going from there into just making sure that all the folks who you're responsible to understand how important it is to you and why, and having, significant pieces of team members. We talked about the triage piece, building teams within your overall structure to talk with those parents of kids who are chronically absent. And again, having the soft touch of, we're calling you in because we're worried. We love you, right? We want to know what's going on. Do you know that this is happening? Maybe even for consecutive years that your child has been chronically absent, and this is what it means. And to me, it's just all about communication and researching your data.
To that point, Dr. Taylor, there was one other question in the chat, and then we'll close. From all of your perspectives, do you suggest reaching out directly to the students or just to the parents? That was a question in the chat.
I would say age matters in that one, right? if a student is an elementary age student, especially lower elementary, they may not have control over if they come to school, right? Um, I think that parents definitely should be informed of what's happening because, and these are statutory requirements. If you want to go to the most, political piece, there are statutory requirements about coming to school. It's the law, right? And if a student is not meeting that standard, we talked about our soft touch, but I would always try to include the family because I want them to know what's happening because they may not know, right? And they may be the one who can help us the most, right? And whether it be, I mean, listen, we all were in high school, and we know sometimes there were temptations to not go to school, right? And being able to have someone who knows when we're there and when we're not there and all that, I would say almost 100% of the time, reaching out to the parent first would be the appropriate way to go. Now, there are circumstances where, you hate to even talk about these pieces where the parent might be the reason the kid's not coming to school, right? And so understanding that and maybe getting advice from the guidance counselor or the attendance office about what the policy says about those circumstances.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all so much for your time today and everything that you shared. We will be sharing, like Ela said, some of the resources with the folks who attended today. And I just feel today makes me feel so lucky that I get to work and be in community with you all and learn from you. So I just want to appreciate your years of service in this work and dedication to our students, because at the end of the day, that's what we're all here for ultimately. And we just want to thank everyone for joining today. At EOS, we will be having future webinars. We'll be sending out the recording from today and some resources. We also are doing an all-in attendance collaborative in collaboration with CZI and Ed First that is just starting next week. And so we will be having learnings and sharings with the community in the future. And so we will be very excited to share those additional findings with you all and the tools that we build, the data tools that we build that hopefully can make it easier for our district and school leaders to have the data, have the tools to go and most effectively do this work. And so thank you everyone for joining. We have an upcoming webinar in February. Stuart, I don't know if you want to voice over some of these upcoming events as you know them best.
Yeah, for sure. We're doing a new webinar series this spring. So we had today on absenteeism, and also coming in this week, obviously with the election, there's a lot of things happening in the education industry. So we'll do a webinar in February focused around what you can expect in the post-election landscape. We're going to be pulling in some really interesting panelists for that one, so it's going to be very relevant, difficult, but positive conversation, I think. So it'll be a good one. And then we're going to be hitting the road. So we're really excited to go to ASA, the NCE conference in New Orleans in March, and in April at NSBA in Atlanta. So great opportunities to meet with you in person, and we look forward to that. As you mentioned, we'll send out today's recording with also that first report and some other resources for everybody. So thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And as Stuart said, if you don't know about Equal Opportunity Schools, there's a link to our website. Please, that gives more details about what was mentioned of our student insight card. We just, again, so appreciate all the years of experience and expertise and love that came through on this call today. Really appreciate you today, but every day that I get to work with you. So thank you all so much for what you're contributing to the field, and have a wonderful day, everyone.